Shalom, family. Welcome, welcome. The Strong's Insight, as you may know, is too many games. And I am Chief Yuya, the Chief Jegna, the ANU Nation, and head priest of ANU Life Global Ministries. So today's the 30th, right? For those of you who are tuning in the moment, or maybe later, the number 30 reduces to a 3. 3 in our supreme mathematics is understanding. So not just in theory, but and not just in talk, but 3 is clarity. It's a clarity that's proven within the circle of a cipher. That's your 30, right? Your 30th. So your cipher is your community, it's your household, it's your enterprise. These are all different things that can be counted as a cipher. And there's many other things that we can also consider to be the cipher. But if we understand, and I'm using the word understand for particular emphasis, let's get into the month that we're in for a second before we get into too many games, because this is a part of it. We're in the Gregorian month of August, and August, in its actual name, we call it because it was named in 8 BCE, in particular, after Caesar Augustus. That was Rome's. It was considered to be Rome's first emperor, the Octavian, and Augustus itself in Latin is a name that can be transliterated as venerable, or majestic, or even consecrated. That's your augur, coming from the root. And well, it comes from the root, which is a verb, actually, augur. And augur means to increase or to grow. So with Augustus, it means, majestic, consecrated, things like that. But its root, it's actually augur, like how you have augment, right? And augment means to grow or to get larger. So symbolically, when we look at the month, it was consecrated to honor the empire, the Roman Empire. It was consecrated to honor power. And most importantly, the cult of the emperor. In those days, emperors were worshipped. They were like deities, So to speak August, to say August, it was to invoke the Roman imperial religion, which was a system that glorified men as gods. Okay, in that particular system, right? So when you're saying August, or when August is said, that's its intention to deify Caesar Augustus, or Caesare Augustus. But then you have August as well in the Hebrew calendar, and the Hebrew calendar doesn't necessarily recognize August because there's a time span that goes between Av and Elul, right? So Av is like mid-July to mid-August. And then just in terms of meaning, Av, like Ab, Av means father, or can be transliterated into father. And it's known as a month of destruction, a month of exile, because the temples were destroyed in the month of Av, the temples. And in Jerusalem, they were destroyed on the 9th of Av, which is Tisha B'Av, right? And then after that destruction, you have the seeds, or what we would call the beginning, or the seeding of rebuilding, and the beginning of comfort, sort of like rebuilding the lost mine again, if you will. And the energy you have of Av is the energy of being corrected through judgment, and then establishing new foundations for restoration. So then after that, you have Elu. Elu is mid-August to mid-September, right? And Elu comes from, actually, it's an older word. It comes from the Akkadian Elulu. And Elulu in the Akkadian means harvest. So it's a harvest time. So our ancient Afro-Shemitic Hebrews, they had an acronym that they would speak about for Elulu, and it was Ani le Dodi Vidodili, and Ani le Dodi Ve Dodili means I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. Now that may sound familiar to you because it was jacked later for the Song of Solomon. That's Song of Solomon, 6th chapter, 3rd verse, right? So there's a time of repentance in Elulu or Elul, and for return and self-examination. And you're doing that in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, right? Well, maybe I'll do some breakdowns for you on that a little later. So the energy there would be a preparation for new beginnings, and most importantly, cleaning the vessel. So if we're looking at it also from a numerical lens, the 8th month, in supreme mathematics, we have 8, which is build and destroy. So in Hebrew gematria, the 8th letter is chet, and chet is the doorway. It represents life. Chet is life, but it's also a fence as well. So you either enter the gate and you build life, or you close the gate and destroy yourself. So when you look at sort of chet in action and meaning in that sense, it gives you different variations, right? Now, these are just things that we can look at when we're looking at the numbers, whether we're looking at today being the 30th, we're looking at the fact that we're in the Gregorian 8th. When you're looking at the August from a Roman sort of framework, it's a month stamped with empire, man being God, uh, worldly majesty, and power politics. Really important. And if you're looking at it from an Afro-Shemitic framework, it would be Av Elul, right? Sounds like Shai Elul from the Dune series, but Av Elul, Av again being father, judgment, comfort after ruin, destruction, and Elul being harvest, repentance. I am my beloved, going back to the Song of Solomon. So it's a season of correction, and it's a season of return. You have that numerical vibration of 8, build and destroy, Ochet being the doorway to life. Now, these are important things. I know sometimes it was like people were a little put off sometimes by me breaking down the Greek and the Roman and the Latin. But North America is Rome, and it's important to understand how they think. It's not to give you a bunch. I would always say it's not for more gods to worship. It's to understand what these people are serving. Rome made August about worshiping man as a divine, but in Hebrew reckoning, the same season is about fatherhood. It's about repentance. It's about rebuilding. It's about harvesting, right? I mean, if you're going to do a Father's Day, it should be in that Av Elul period. And the path that you choose depends on which calendar you live by, right? So the Circus of the Empire is one calendar, and the Covenant of Elohim is another calendar. And you can decide: am I going to live by the Circus of the Roman Empire, or am I going to live by the Covenant of the Most High, right? So when you look at August, that Roman name, it exalts empire. Like I said, it's the emperor as God, God in the flesh. And it's that worldly majesty, this majestic God has sort of manifested or secreted himself into the bloodline of the emperor. And of course, it's rooted in power politics, and then when you have that Hebraic Avalul month that overlaps it. You have that comfort, you have that judgment, but you have that fatherhood, that Av, that Aleph Bet, Aleph Bet. Aleph Bet is your Ab, where you get words like Abba or Abu, or Baba, right? And then you have Elul being, or Elulu from the Akkadian, the older Akkadian language, right? It's the repentance time. It's I'm my beloved. It's the season of return, the season of correction. And like I said, whether you're dealing with the doorway leading into life with the chet, the eighth number, or you're leading with the gate that's closing, when you're walking away from life, it's still going to give you that sort of numerological sort of energy of build or destroy. Anytime you build something, you're destroying something. And believe it or not, anytime you're destroying something, you're building something. So build and destroy really work hand in hand. Just like when you're harvesting, you're destroying, right? But when you're harvesting, you're also building. Sometimes you're clearing the way for new growth. And like I said, today being the 30th, understanding cipher, all being born to understanding. Understanding comes from the old English understanding. Understanding means to stand in the midst of something or to stand among something, right? I know a lot of times in like I'll say our conscious vernacular, we take understanding and we kind of flip it in a cool way where we say overstanding, or we might say understanding. You'll hear me say understanding a lot because I like it, but it's important to be able to go beyond the surface. Sometimes within the cultural community and the conscious community, we pick up on certain things that are not necessarily right and exact, but they're a statement of our rebellion against oppression. So we might say, well, man, I don't understand nothing, because to understand something means that I'm standing under. So if you go to court and the judge says, do you understand? Don't say yes, say something, say I comprehend, or I hear what you're saying, or whatever, but don't say that you stand under, right? And there's different schools of thoughts and why we might say that. But the truth is, in the word understanding, which was the original word, under, it doesn't mean beneath. That's not what it's referring to. It means among. And then stand means to fix yourself. Just like your bike may have a kickstand, or you may have a picture frame that has a stand, or your phone may even have a stand, right? It means to take a firm position, to not waver, like Sly and the Family Stone says, stand, so it's that kind of idea. So if you put the two terms together in understanding, the original form, it means to stand firmly within a thing until its nature is revealed. That's actually what understanding is. So understanding isn't, it's not a private thing, or an abstract thing. It's proven. Your understanding is proven, by how well it stands when tested inside of the cipher or inside of the circle. So the word itself, if you look at the word understanding reveals its own principle. If you're not standing within it, you don't yet understand it. you know so to gain understanding, like we say in the nation of gods and earth, understanding is the best part, because you're in the mix, you're in the fray. It's like when you have a child, we have the sun, moon, and stars, which is the father, mother of the child. And we understand that the child is the understanding, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, father, knowledge, mother, wisdom, child, understanding. The child stands in the midst of the parents. The child stands in the midst of the cipher. So what you claim to know must stand when tested among others. If it collapses, it wasn't understanding. It was never understanding if it collapses. It's like giving birth to a child, and the child doesn't reflect any of your wisdom, any of your science, any of your knowledge. That's not your child. It's probably the New World Order's child. You've just been holding on to it. That's why, like, when we look at 2025, the year, born, right? Manifestation, completion, the visible fruit, all the things that we've been cultivating, and then together on a full vibration, if you double down on it, understanding demands understanding of us right now. So this is why, I entitled this insight Too Many Games, because I think it's timely. Games distract from understanding. Games will distract you from standing in the midst of what you need to stand in order to reveal your nature, and games tend to collapse when you test them. You ever have someone playing a game with you and you kind of know how to shut a game down? You know, like I do this thing a lot of times when I see people hustling on the street, when I know it's a hustle, like when they're asking for money, they're panhandling, but it's the hustle panhandling, it's not the other one. When I kind of have this thing where I could see things, I don't know, I got like good scan vision. I'll see things from a while away, like, a quarter of a mile away. I could see, okay, this is going on. So usually if I see that type of vibe and I know I'm going to be targeted, I'll immediately, as soon as the person gets near me, I'll go to them and I say, yo, you got $1? You got $1 I can hold? I do it before they even ask me. And a lot of times they'll say, I was going to ask you for $1. Oh, you don't ask, man. Actually, it happened to me recently. Yeah, I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and somebody rolled up on me on a bicycle at that. He was like, yo, big bro. Boo, 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 boo. I was like, yo, I'm effed up right now. I didn't say effed up, but I said, I'm messed up right now. Man, I saw you on the bike and everything. He was eating a biscuit with jelly on it. So I guess he got somebody's KFC. And I was like, man, I'm effed up right now. I was going to ask you for a couple bucks so I could buy some gas. And he was like, oh, big bro. Then he lifted up his shirt. He was like, man, I just fell off my bike a couple of days ago, messed up my whole side. This dude ran into me. Like, so we having a whole conversation about that, right? Shut the game down. The game collapsed. So now, instead of him conning me out of whatever couple bucks he was going to con me out of, I made a new friend. We talking about riding bicycles, falling down, and we showing each other scar. I'm like, yo, check this out, man. I got this from the exhaust pipe on my motorcycle. This is when I was doing a wheelie down such and such, and dude ran into me once. I was on my bike. I used to have this Suzuki Hammerhead. If you know bikes, you know what a Hammerhead is. And I had it tricked out for the track. So I made it street legal. I put some headlights stuff on it, but it was really a track bike. And 2 a.m. because the only time I used to do tricks on my bikes was in the middle of the night, and that was my thing in case I would fall or something nobody would see. And I'm going on the block. I got it up in the air on one wheel. I'm wheeling, got it up. This dude comes and runs into the side of me, man, with this little BS Yamaha. I think it was a YZ1000. And he was like, yo, he's trying to talk to me while I'm in the air. He was like, yo, I got it up. And I look over, and when I look over, he curves his bike like into mine while I'm in the air and hits my bike while I'm mid wheelie. And we went sliding all the way down the block, man. Let me tell you something. We slid so long that I lifted up my helmet and cursed him out while we were still sliding on the ground. Yeah, that was a night, boy. My whole side was all bloodied up. I was like, yo, what the thing you doing? I was like, yo, you ain't see me. And when we finally stopped sliding and we got up, he wouldn't take his helmet off. Like, I guess he knew I was going to crack him. He wouldn't take his helmet off, and his bike wouldn't start back up. He didn't have no license. He had no insurance because the cops showed up. I guess neighbors heard it and they called the cops, whatever. But my bike actually started right back up. My plastics were all cracked up. Anyway, I'm all off the point. My bad. I'm reminiscing. I don't know what that had to do with anything. Sometimes you just, youngins, sometimes you just gotta go for the ride with Unc. Just hop in, listen to my old school music, and just go for a ride with Unc. You're gonna learn something. You might be like, Unc, why we going here? Why we here? Come on, youngin, just come on. Watch the car. If anybody comes, just honk the horn. But you're gonna have to ride in the car. We're gonna listen to Cheryl Lynn, Got to Be Real. We're gonna listen to Guy. Let's chill. we're gonna listen to Illmatic. You're gonna listen to a lot of Nas. You're gonna listen to some Tupac. You're gonna listen to some, like I said, some Cheryl Lynn. You're gonna listen to some D Train. You riding with Unc. So just sometimes go for the ride. But I promise you, if you ride with Unc, I'm gonna put you on. put you on something. So anyway, like I said, the games are a distraction from understanding, and when they're tested, they tend to collapse. Games will entertain a crowd, but they don't actually manifest the truth. That's an important thing to know about games. You know, so we were speaking about like being in August, the Roman month. We can't not talk about the Roman games. The Roman games were really a cultural net in many sense. In Rome's the games, they actually started off as religious rituals. Your Roman games were originally rituals to Venus. They were rituals to Jupiter. They were rituals to Mars. But over time, the Roman Empire started twisting them into political weapons. So the circus, which was initially it was like a sacred religious event, the circus no longer was sacred, but it was a state-sponsored distraction. It's kind of similar to what they did with the cannabis, right? So now men were thrown into the arena as gladiators, and they were stripped of their freedom. They were reduced to pawns for the crowd's pleasure. Many were not Roman at all. They would capture people, prisoners of war, POWs. And these prisoners of war oftentimes were from Carthage. They were from Nubia. They were from Ethiopia. So you also had what you would call your Israelites or your Hebrews, these Afro-Shemitics. They were taken during the conquests of Judea and beyond. So Rome trafficked people. Rome practiced human trafficking, and they would traffic people into the amphitheaters, and they would force them to fight animals. They would force them to fight soldiers, and sometimes they would force them to fight each other, even unto the death. So their blood fed the empire's entertainment, their blood. And the women weren't excluded because women filled the stands. They would be intoxicated by the spectacle and the luxury of it all. Because for women, the circus became a place also to display status. The circus became a place to display their identity. And even among what we say were the performers, women were often enslaved, and they were taken from the East. They were taken from Akibalan or Africa, and sometimes they were paraded in this sort of theatrical display. They will be paraded around the arenas during the circus. They will be humiliated in these sort of staged mythological reenactments. They might do the story of Medusa or the story of Hercules, and they would use these women's. They would use these women as forced actors, and that would reinforce Rome's message of conquest over foreign nations and bodies. So if they captured these Nubian women, they would then do these plays they would force them to be in to show everybody in Rome, this is what we did to them, And then you had children. Children grew up idolizing the gladiators. They would reenact the violence in play, like children do today, like cowboys and Indians, right? Well, I don't know if they play that anymore, but when I was a child, that was a thing. And some of those gladiators, of course, were dark-skinned captives. A lot of times African or Kibalonic men were displayed because they were considered to be exotic warriors, or they were barbarians, as they were called. And the children would share their deaths. They would never see the human dignity of those lives, and that normalized violence, and that normalized dehumanization, especially towards people who are more melanin rich, in their skin, who have darker pigmentation. And that began to embed a racial hierarchy into the Roman consciousness. So it was never sport. It was never just a sport. It was a cultural net, and it was designed to bind everyone from men to the women and to the children of Rome. They were all designed, it was designed for all of them to be distracted and pacified, and they would pacify them and distract them while enslaved Africans, Afro-Shemitic people, Hamitic people were fed to the arena to keep the machine running. So you have this concept of panim et circuses, or panim et circenses. That's the bread and circuses. Panim, bread, et, and circenses, circus. And that became Rome's formula. Pacify the masses, glorify the empire, and strip true power from the people. So our ancestors, as Afro-Shemitic people, those of you who fall in line in that lineage, they were victims and tools within that system. You see, so you have modern circuses today, that are important to pay attention to, and the modern sort of panim, or bread, and circus today. When you look at when you look at the Roman Empire, the empire fell. Yeah, the empire may have fallen, but the circus never actually ended. So the same distractions that the Romans pacified, or the leaders of Rome pacified Rome with, they still exist, but now they exist in new forms. And just like back then, they used to exploit and dehumanize our people. So when you look at it today, if you sort of what's the word? Fast forward. When you sort of fast forward to today, you see men are still pushing to gladiator roles, through sports, through street violence, through prisons. I can attest that there are certain prisons in New York that we were, like, when I was younger, Spofford Youth Detention, which unfortunately for a lot of us young brothers coming up, Spofford was almost like a rite of passage. When you would go through something, or you would get caught up in something, and you get sent to Spofford, you come back home, you come back to school eventually, whenever you get to come back home, and everybody find out, yo, you was in Spofford, like that was considered a gladiator school. And that was the term we used back then. That's a gladiator jail. And certain jails were like that. At one point in New Jersey, Rahway was like that. Rahway was a gladiator jail. These are jails that as soon as you go in, you fighting, or you're being tested. Yeah, I don't get on into that, but from street violence to prisons, and then again, you have the idolization of rappers, you have the idolization of athletes, you have the idolizations of even fighters, right? And this idolization, it turns their bodies into entertainment for the world. So it's no different than the arena, if you look at it. Where their victories or their deaths are wagered on. Because back then they would wager on fights, and they're wagered on, they're celebrated, and they're consumed by crowds who don't care anything about their true humanity. The system keeps them fighting in false battles. And these games that generate wealth for others, but drain the people who are involved in the battles and in the fights, it drains their legacy. You have women, again, who are not excluded from this even today. Women are still drawn into the spectacle of all of this. Fashion, beauty industries, the social media stage. It's a new kind of circus where the Nubian woman, her body is now commodified. It's exoticized, it's paraded, and it's consumed. Churches have become arenas too. You look at like even the design of most mega churches now, it looks like the arena. These churches, they offer you emotional highs. They offer you pageantry, but not the discipline of covenant. They don't offer you that. So instead of nurturing nations or nurturing nation builders, the system grooms women for dependency. It grooms women for vanity. And I think one of the most heinous things in this time, it grooms women for applause, right? And then still the children have not escaped. Children are still trained by the circus. Um, they idolize athletes. Children idolize rappers. And children idolize even influencers. Just like in Rome, children idolize the gladiators. It's the hypersexuality, it's the violence, and it's distraction that are packaged as entertainment, from TikTok to cartoons to video games, they all normalize destruction and chaos. You know, so by the time that they reach maturity, these children, they're already integrated into a system now that exploits their attention. They're integrated into a system that exploits their creativity without building their identity. This is why so many people, they have this middle age crisis where it's like, I don't know who I am. You haven't known for 40 years, So just as Rome fed our African and our Afro-Shemitic or our Hamitic and our Afro-Shemitic ancestors to the arena, the modern circuses feed us to the machine of media, to the machine of consumerism, and to the machine of entertainment culture. And the result is actually still the same. If you were to, again, use that fast forward button, the result is still that men, women, and children are still pacified. They're still pacified. And while true power, which is the control over our time, the control over land, the control over families, the control over our destiny, all of that is stripped away. And we don't even notice, or we don't even care to notice, because we are so deeply engulfed in the entertainment. You look at certain sports seasons and, I know even for myself as a motorcycle enthusiast, things like Bike Week, whether you're going to Daytona or whether you're going to Myrtle Beach, I know guys who ride and all year round, they're tooling around and polishing and cleaning up their bikes, getting ready for Bike Week. It's a year away, don't even hardly even ride the bike anymore. One of my bikes, I got like beautiful chrome rims on that bike. That's my Honda. It's so reliable too. It starts up right up. Like no matter how long I got it sitting, it just comes right up. I gotta get a battery for that bike actually. But I'm always cleaning that bike because I'm always getting it dirty. Because I ride that joint. I ride it. That's what it's there for. I don't worship it. If I get a crack on the plastics or something, I got a crack on the plastics. I'll put some that particular bike is red. I'll put some red duct tape on it and keep it pushing. It's not my distraction. It's my tool for therapy. And the reason it's my tool for therapy is because I'm a nation builder, and that's a very stressful role that I've accepted. So being able to ride and speed up and down a highway at, life-threatening speeds, it's a release for me and it's therapy, right? But it's not something I would ever worship. So I would tell you all, family, like the circus never ended. They just changed the form of the circus. And whether you're worshiping your relationship, your your car, your motorcycle, your athletes, your rappers. Men are consumed by endless games, sports obsessions, political debates, online battles, fighting with what they call them, keyboard warriors, fantasy leagues, even the false competitions of street life. A lot of that is contrived. Well, we don't mess with them over there. Well, what's the difference between them over there and us over here? I grew up in a town where we had rivalries with other towns, and I mean violent rivalries. If you were on the bus or you were visiting a young lady, and people, like the way New York is that each borough has its own swag, if you will. So Harlem moves a little different than Brooklyn. Brooklyn moves a little different than the Bronx. Bronx moves different than Staten Island. Staten Island moves different than Long Island. Then you got Mount Vernon, you got Yonkers. And if you're in tune enough, you can watch someone and you could figure out where they're from. Of course, we speak different. Now, I know from for those who are not from New York, we all probably sound the same to you. I hear people try to imitate us sometimes. It's funny. They're like, yeah, son. Yeah, son. It's like, yo, don't make me talk like that. It's like from the 90s. But just like if I'm imitating somebody from Cali, it's like, yeah, a bunch of marks going down into the park. I'm going to take my car and go to the park. You know what I mean? Mark busters. And they probably don't talk like that, but that's how they all sound to me. A bunch of mark ass busters. This is big skates. This is big space ghost, big homie space ghost, And I'm sure like they probably like, what? Well, it's the same thing, right? So a lot of the competition that we even have in the streets is contrived. Why do you have a problem with someone who lives literally, because the boroughs are packed up against each other? They live 2-3 miles from where you live. Your auntie probably moved to that borough. You go over there for Thanksgiving, whatever, and we don't mess with them. Brooklyn dudes are grimy. Harlem's like the song we used to have. Harlem keeps on making it. Brooklyn keeps on taking it, which was true because all the stick-up kids did come from Brooklyn. I mean, I'm sorry, but nonetheless, still the same people. You got to listen to a little bit more Peter Tosh. So the thing about it, we're all one. But the machine creates these false competitions, and women, oftentimes they're targeted through consumer culture. They're targeted through vanity cycles. Churches that will stir up emotions, but they rarely demand any discipline. But they will clap and jump and come on, y'all. Give God the praise. Give God the praise. They want to stir up all this discipline, get the best singers, the best musicians. They know when to dim the lights and all that, but they don't put any of that energy into discipline. Living by the laws, living by the statutes, living by the command. Nah. A lot of times church services, they're just fashion shows. They're motivational pep rallies. Which is a modern day circus. That's what the circus was in Rome. It was a fashion show. It was a motivational rally. So you get hyped up on Rome. Same thing. Then you have children who are hypnotized by these glowing screens. The TikTok challenges that they have, the cartoons. In church, you have these youth ministries, and the youth ministries, they teach play all day, but there's no passage into responsibility. But we could do one-arm sack races and tug of war and this and that. That's bread and circus all over again. It's the same thing all over again. So Rome gave bread and shows. So today we're offered fast food, Netflix, mega church concerts, prosperity teachings, and social media trends. Right? It's the same sort of environment and the same sort of trick bag at the end of the day. Elohim spoke through the prophet Amos. And Elohim told Amos, take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your hearts, but let justice roll down. And he said, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever flowing stream. When you think about that, and there's always a passage I always like, that was Amos fifth chapter. It's in the 20s, but it's the 5th chapter of Amos. I liked it because just because you make a bunch of noise and you make a big spectacle doesn't mean you understand something. I think that was an important lesson for me, as a youth and being in certain spaces, because I was never a rowdy person ever. And I would sometimes question myself and, well, maybe why don't I act like this one, that one? Is it that I'm not really in it? Am I not really feeling it, or I'm not really locked in on what they're locked in on? Because I'm chilling, and I feel like I'm grounded in what's being said or whatever, but I don't know, And the thing is that you start to learn as you evolve and grow, and this is for anyone who's ever asked themselves that, like I said, noise and spectacle are not necessarily an understanding, because they don't stand when tested inside of the circle. When you test it in the circle, the noise and the spectacle doesn't count for anything, So you want to see if you have the ability to be tried by the fire and to be tested within the circle. You see, that's the thing. And when we're speaking at it or about it from an ANU perspective, this is where the understanding's got to rise. Ancestors didn't see understanding as an abstraction or, like I said, as a private thing. They saw it as something that was put inside of a circle, right? When you look at rites of passage, someone says, I'm 12 now, I'm 13 now, I'm 16 now, I'm 18, or we have rites of passage even, I think, in our community, when your children buck back at you after a certain point, you're like, all right, you know what? Then you do this, you pay this bill. See, the ancestors saw that understanding was something that would be tested inside of your household, tested inside of your community or your enterprise. And like I said, if it collapsed on you, then it never was understanding. So when you look at situations with our young people sometimes, who sometimes they just feel they know everything. You can't tell them anything, and sometimes that's a trait of the society programming that's there, right? Where there's a lack of respect for elders. Like I said, that under is not the beneath, it's among. So to say I understand you means that I have moved with you. I've woven myself into your presence and inside of it. To understand something means you were inside of it. You were in its presence. To say, hey man, I understand car engines. You got to be in that. And have you had your hands deep down in there? To stand, it's fixing yourself, to be unmoving, to see the truth of a matter that's revealed. So I'm understanding something. I'm standing firmly within a thing until its actual nature is revealed, and to remain standing even when it's tested. That's understanding. I stood in the midst of it. Its nature was revealed to me and I didn't run. I stood 10 toes down. You see, that's your vibration of understanding, man. And you'll never get that distracted by the circus. Like I told you, that 3, it's the balance point. Balance point, 1 plus 1, plus 1. There's a stability inside of the circle. And just like I said, when you look at this year, 2025, it's born. It's manifestation. So what you understand must now take form. Sometimes we sit back and we admire truth and we admire knowledge. Like, oh, that's so cool. I know. Oh, wow, that's deep. And we like to rub our chin and, wow, man, that was real deep. That was real deep. When does it take form? When does it stand? And not just stand in your mind, but stand in your home, stand in your works, When I see your works, when I see how you live, when I see how you structure your home, is it structured around that understanding? You see, is it structured around that wisdom and what that knowledge? I have to say, like, for a lot of you guys, men, stop pouring your energy into false battles, man. Rivalries, debates, games that feed nothing. Your strength is not, we weren't built for the circus. Your role is to stand as a pillar. Your role as a man is to stand as a pillar of clarity, to guide your family and to guide your community with understanding that holds up when tested. See, when you just want to see people outside because you said something they don't agree with you and they're now challenging you, or you got caught saying something that don't make any sense, and now you're like, well, see me outside. you know um that means your understanding, it can't hold. You full of crap. You're not a real man. When I was a young boy, man, I used to visit my cousin all the time. My cousin Michael. I got like 6 cousin Michaels, by the way. And the youth around their neighborhood were much different than the youth in like, they were advanced. They were really advanced. I remember being 10 and my cousin was showing me condoms. And I shouldn't laugh because now I'm an adult. This is bad. But he was using, like, they were out there doing it, you know? And yeah, they would do, like, they'd have these parties, these blue light parties, where you'd be grinding on girls and stuff. Like, we were babies, But yeah, I grew up fast. I grew up real fast hanging out with cousin Michael. But because I just wanted to ride bikes and steal candy out of stores. Good old wholesome little child stuff. But when you talk about things that are tested, man, I remember they used to test me a lot, like his friends, because I was different. I was coming from a different place and everything, and different borough, right? They were in one borough, I was in another. And so they used to always, back then we called it cracking on each other. Some people call it, the older people call it doing the dozens. Cutting ass was another term. Like, it's different, all different, breaking on each other, but it's just making fun of each other. And back then I wasn't funny yet. I was funny, but I didn't have a quick wit like they had. And they used to get me, man. And every time they would get me, I want to fight. Every time, man. And they'd have to, like, call Mike, like, yo, get your cousin, man. Like, every time he lose, he want to fight somebody, because I'd be like, yeah, but you can't beat me, because my feelings would be hurt. I remember one time we was out there and I had this fake gold chain on. I would do stuff like I'm just setting myself up, but I didn't know at that age. I was a little boy, but I thought I was killing it. I had a fake gold chain and it was clearly fake. Like, it was different colors, it was peeling. And they started getting on me, man. And all right, time to Hawk out, and I was like, I'm ready to fight the room. Because my coolness and my mind, my flyness, it couldn't stand up when tested. Because if I really believed that I was what I thought I was portraying, then it wouldn't have collapsed when it was challenged like that. So your understanding will only hold up, when it's tested. That's real understanding. And then, of course, we have situations with women too. Women need to learn to resist the pull of being a spectacle. Resist the pull of vanity. The Roman Empire or the Western Empire, the United States or Canada, the West is going to tell you that your worth is in being seen. Your worth is in being adorned, or your worth is in being entertained, but the covenant of the cosmos says discipline is your strength, and your strength is in your sacred nurturing. and your ability to shape a household, and your ability to bring order to your children where distraction seeks to enter in. You know, so when you stand in the midst of truth, it's much more powerful than standing in the midst of performance. You know, and again, for your children have to learn that the games that they play must become lessons and legacy. You know, to be trained by TikTok and empty distractions does nothing. Be trained by rites of passage. Be trained by discipline. Be trained by stories that build your identity. You know, your play should always prepare you for purpose. You know, it shouldn't keep you from it. You know, that was one of the things that I was always very much in tune to as a child, because where I grew up was very rural for a while. Like, we moved out of the city, but my cousins and stuff were still in the city. And while they were learning how to put condoms on and impregnating little girls, where I lived, the young people were hunting and riding motorcycles and building their own go-karts with lawnmower engines in it, you know, and things like that. They were learning how to survive, while these other ones were learning how to destroy their lives. When you look at Jeremiah 6:16, it says, stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths. You know, the old paths are the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. I always like that scripture because it talks about the old paths. And again, you see that word stand, right? Not play, not wander until you find the old path, but stand. So the true game that's really worth playing is not the circus of distraction. The true game that's worth playing is the path of order. It's the covenant, and it's the eternal legacy. You see, that's the only thing really, really worth doing. And like I said, man, I spent time in different environments and seeing people who were just addicted to the game, especially, you know, coming up in an urban area when I was young. Fashion was a big thing. Like, what kind of sneakers you got, and how many sneakers do you have, and, you know, what kind of hat is that? What kind of coat is that? You know, does the coat match the hat? You know, with the matching hat to match you know, like, understanding means that when false games collapse, you're still standing. You know, it means your leadership and your nurturing and your training, they endure when the noise fades. Like, all that fashion, it, you know, it doesn't endure. Like, the stuff that we spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on. You know, Rome distracted its people with bread and with circuses until nothing stood. Everything was gone. ANU still stands. And when you really understand and learn the history of ANU, you learn that ANU was a rebel. Well, I'll get into that another time. But ANU was the leader of a rebellion, or a revolt, probably is a better word to use. You know, Rome burned while crowds roared in the arena. While they were in the arena, yeah, Rome was burning. And today, families collapse while churches are going to be shouting and dancing with no discipline. You know, communities crumble while you got men or adult boys chasing false battles, women who are pulled into vanity and are made a spectacle, and children who just scroll endlessly with no rites of passage, man. That's just too many games. That's all game. You know, so I would say this strong. I'll give you a simple charge. Do your best to identify one game in your life, one distraction, one spectacle that, if it were tested, it collapses. Then walk away from it. Refuse to play where the empire sets the rules. Replace that game with one act of discipline, just one. One act of discipline that builds your understanding in your household so that your circle now has the power to stand. That's a charge I'm a give to you. I would love to hear where you're going with it, what you've identified in the comments. And one of the reasons, because I think there'll be commonalities in what we identify, right? We have to work to not be like the crowds who are content with bread and circuses. Uh, we have to be that remnant that continually seeks understanding, that continually manifests order and brings balance like Haru did when Haru restored Ma'at. And those people who stand firmly within truth. You know, as I knew, we don't play games with time. Time is so very precious. You know, we don't play games with our destiny. We don't play games with our households. That's why we have covering initiatives and courting and so many things. You know, we stepped out of the circus and we stepped into divine order. And that's understanding. That's born. When you really want to understand like what it means to born, what it means to manifest, you know, you're stepping out of something that was fruitless, that was pointless. And you're going into something that has meaning and that has purpose. So just chant that, Tisa, man. Too many games, no more games, man. No more games. Identify that one thing that distracts you from purpose and distracts you from understanding. Walk away from it. It's gonna be hard because whatever you just came up with, you might have came up with something in your mind already and said, oh, but that's gonna be too hard. Nothing is too hard when it comes to gaining understanding. Nothing is too hard. That's like saying, man, I'm not gonna have a baby because it's too hard to produce the necessary fluids to make the baby. Okay. Or it's too hard to allow the baby to release from my my womb and from the amniotic sac and through its passage through my vagina. That's too hard. So you don't want to produce understanding. You want to stagnate, but there really is never any true stagnation. It's only going backwards. You think you're sitting still when you're really going backwards. That's the tricky thing about life. It's always moving. It's real tricky. You think, meditating, I'm sitting still. I say, you crazy. Even when you're sitting still, you're still aging. So it's always moving. So you can choose to move with the current and get in front of it, or you could regress. You can get an old body and a young mind, but not young in a good way. You could be childish or you could be childlike. I strive to every day to be childlike. And the way that I keep my youthful and childlike innocence is that I push myself beyond where I was yesterday every single day. So every day becomes a new thing. It's like learning how to walk every single day, learning a new word every single day. Learning new languages every single day, so that I stay in a space of awe. I'm constantly producing new understanding, new clarity, never standing within something that hasn't been tested. If not, if I don't understand, I don't understand. I didn't stand inside of that. I didn't see the presence of that truly revealed through its actualized state. I didn't see that broken down on a molecular level. I don't understand it. Your Western schools didn't teach you that's what understanding is. Your Western schools taught you, the teacher says something in about 10 seconds and say, you understand? You say, even though you didn't understand, but you were too embarrassed to say, how the heck could I understand that? I've never stood in it. You're not even making mathematics something that's alive. Mathematics should be true and living. You're teaching it from a Western perspective and not an Eastern perspective. So you're teaching me all dead information. I don't want to stand in the midst of all this death. So I don't relate to it. Teach me something that's living, that's true and living, that's alive. It will stand the test of time. That's why some of you go back to very old segments that I've done 10 years ago and better. And you're like, man, Chief, I'm still listening to such and such. Yeah, because it was true and living. So it's still alive. I don't teach you dead stuff. You see, there's value in that. You'll gain a better understanding because it's stronger. It's still alive. It's not brittle and going to break. You know, it's like when you could speak to a Christian about the flood, right? They'll tell you, yeah, God flooded the earth and everybody died. And And I've had that conversation. I said, well, then how was it Goliath after the flood? If everybody died and it was only Noah's crew, then where did the giant come from? Goliath was a giant. He was a Nephilim. Where did he come from? Now, there's different ways to break that down because there actually was Nephilim blood on that ark. That's one thing. But also, another thing is, those stories were mistranslated from the original language at a time when everyone still thought the earth was flat. I know, flat earthers, I know. But I'm just saying, though. So they really gave you this image and this idea that the world being flat, that when the rain came, it was nowhere for it to go. Like it just filled up like the bottom of a glass. And that's how everybody went. But if the world was not flat, then it would surely be possible for some people to still survive the flood. We'll get into that another time. All right. This one, we're talking about fake gold chains, motorcycles, and understanding, and Caesarea Augustus. All right. So willfully, I gave you something that sparked thought, brought you to a better space, bringing you closer and closer to that ANU understanding, so you can navigate your life in a way where every day it's not beating you down and kicking you in the stomach, but you're starting to move with some confidence, with your head high, and able to really put life in a headlock that it needs to be sometimes. Sometimes you gotta yoke life up. You know, instead of you being yoked up by the games and the circus and by the Roman Empire, you should be yoked to the Most High. You know, then things get more clear. Things start to make more sense and they get less goofy and buffoonish. All right. So with that, I want to thank you so much for riding with me. This is Chief Yuya. And if for those of you who are interested in joining the ANU Nation, always go to anulifeglobal.org. There we also have some free text that you can download as well, you know, and I do mean free. There's no trick behind it. If you want to give a donation, you can. If you don't want to, you ain't gotta, right? The most important thing is that we wake people up. And like I say, each one teach seven. If you learned something in this segment today, or I said something that you said, say what? You know, go build with someone. Say, hey man, this guy said something on YouTube. Maybe you can share the video. He said this. What you think of this? And build on it, man. Keep the mind, keep the synapses firing off. Keep it fresh. Don't let any dust fall on your brain. All right. With that, thank you so much. Be well. Shalom alaikum.